There is a weight that cannot be measured in kilograms and that you cannot see in the mirror. It is the weight of carrying a life that was not chosen but inherited, imposed, accepted out of exhaustion or fear. This weight accumulates over years of inner silence, of swallowing truths, of postponing the necessary confrontation with everything that rots within while maintaining a facade of normalcy to the outside world. The exhaustion that many feel does not come from work, tasks, or daily obligations. It comes from living disconnected from one's own being, from inhabiting a body that moves automatically while the soul screams forgotten in some basement of consciousness. The coming year carries the same old promise: new beginnings, changes, transformation. But how many times have you made that promise? How many times have you sworn that this time it will be different, that this time discipline, focus, and willpower will be there? And how many times, weeks later, have you found yourself in exactly the same place? Perhaps even more frustrated because you tried and failed again. This cycle is not the result of lacking willpower. It is a symptom of trying to repair a house from the roof down. When the foundation is cracked, it is impossible to organize the outer life as long as the inner disorder remains untouched, feeding on old fears and beliefs that were never truly your own. Carl Jung devoted his life to understanding this abyss between who we are and who we pretend to be. He called this process individuation, the long, painful, and liberating path toward wholeness. Not perfect, not admirable, not approved by everyone, but integral, complete in its contradictions, aware of its shadow side, reconciled with its wounds. This process is not glamorous. It generates no likes. It will not become a story of instant triumph. It is dirty work, done behind the scenes of the soul, far from the spotlights, in the solitude that is necessary to confront everything one has avoided for years. The true reorganization of life does not begin with lists, goals, or plans. It begins with a brutal act of honesty with oneself. Looking in the mirror and acknowledging, "This life I am living is not mine. These decisions were not mine. These dreams are not mine. This fear that paralyzes me was not born in me, it was planted. This guilt I carry does not belong to me, it was imposed on me. This emptiness I try to fill with distractions and frantic activity is, in reality, the space where my true identity should dwell, and it is waiting there." But to reach it, one must pass through the discomfort of admitting that one has been living a comfortable lie. The invitation this moment brings is not another list of resolutions. It is a symbolic death, allowing that version of yourself to die that was built to please, to survive, to be accepted. That version has served its purpose. It protected you when you were vulnerable, but now it is a prison, and you feel it. You feel it in the fear that will not go away, in the exhaustion that sleep does not heal, in the feeling of always running without ever arriving anywhere. This restlessness is not a sign of weakness. It is the call of the soul, asking to be heard, to be honored, to finally have space to exist without masks. Many seek transformation as if it were a quick, efficient product with guaranteed results. They want an improved version of themselves without going through the process of letting go. But there are no shortcuts to individuation. There is no way to achieve wholeness without first acknowledging the fragmented parts. There is no way to bring order without first encountering the chaos. Jung warned that the shadow, everything we deny, repress, and project onto others, does not disappear when ignored. It grows, it strengthens, and eventually it explodes in crises, illnesses, destructive relationships, and patterns that repeat endlessly. The true reorganization is an act of inner archaeology. It involves digging deep, removing layers of conditioning, touching old wounds, bringing memories and patterns to light that one would have preferred to leave buried. This work is not pleasant. It is not suited for social media. No one will applaud when you cry alone and realize how many years you lived on autopilot. No one will validate the moment when you finally admit that you must let go of people, places, and versions of yourself that no longer make sense. But in this solitary work, in this deep immersion, true renewal takes place. Many confuse movement with progress. They fill their calendars, multiply activities, create endless to-do lists. They believe being busy means being productive, and moving means evolving. But movement without direction is simply escape. It is a sophisticated way of avoiding the silence that is necessary to hear what the soul has to say. Jung spent years in voluntary retreat, far from academic life, immersed in his own inner processes. There, far from external expectations, he found the answers he sought, not in books, not in theories, but in honest engagement with himself. Reorganizing life requires, above all else, the courage to stop running, stop explaining, stop acting, stop filling every second with external stimuli that prevent contact with inner reality. In that pause, in that uncomfortable silence, the real questions begin to emerge. What truly matters to me? Who am I when I want to impress no one? Which aspects of my life are authentic, and which are merely theater? What fears are driving my decisions? What limiting beliefs are still sabotaging me? These questions have no predetermined answers. There is no self-help book, no coach, and no guru who could answer them. Each person must find their own way into the unconscious, their own confrontation with the shadow, their own journey through the desert of transformation. But there is a map. Jung left one behind. Not a map of answers, but of the process. A map that shows that the path to wholeness inevitably means acknowledging what is broken, integrating what has been rejected, and accepting what is imperfect. The coming year could be just another one. Another repetition of the same patterns, the same frustration, the same empty promises. Or it could be the starting point of a genuine journey. Not an external transformation that impresses others, but an inner reorganization that finally brings peace. Not a change of appearances, but a change of essence. Not an improved version of the role one has been playing, but the rebirth of who one always was, but never had the courage to be. And that, more than any external achievement, is what it means to become unrecognizable. Not to others, but to yourself, when you look in the mirror and finally recognize your true self. This path is not easy, not fast, not without pain. But it is the only one that leads to genuine freedom, to a life lived from the inside out, not from the outside in. To the feeling of finally inhabiting your own body, your own story, your own existence, without needing external validation for every step. Jung said that an unlived life is an illness from which one can die. And this illness is silent. It does not kill the body, but it lets the soul wither. It lets everything function on the outside, while inside a growing emptiness spreads, a feeling that something fundamental is missing, that life is passing by without one ever being truly present in it. The first step is not ordering, it is admitting. Admitting without excuses, without softening, without rationalizations that dilute the truth. Looking at one's own life and acknowledging it is chaos. The relationships are toxic or empty. The work brings no meaning, only survival. The habits are destructive. The dreams are collecting dust in a forgotten corner of the mind. Health has been neglected. The body has become merely a vehicle one occupies, not a home one truly inhabits. And behind every disordered area lies a wound, a belief, a fear that has never been directly confronted. Shame is the greatest obstacle to this admission, because acknowledging that chaos reigns means admitting that one somehow allowed things to go this far. It means recognizing that wrong decisions were made, that there were omissions, that there were moments when one knew what should have been done, but chose the easier, more comfortable, more accepted path. This guilt can be paralyzing. It can lead one to keep hiding the chaos under the rug, to pretend that everything is fine while the soul suffocates. But shame only has power as long as it remains in the dark. The moment one brings it to light, it loses its power. Jung spoke of the shadow as everything we deny within ourselves, everything we consider unacceptable, shameful, or weak. But the shadow does not disappear when ignored.
It acts.
It sabotages. It creates repeating patterns, causing one to stumble over the same stones again and again, to attract the same problems, to always end up in the same place, despite swearing it would be different this time. The only way to break this cycle is to acknowledge the shadow, to look at it, to name it, without judgment, without self-punishment, simply with the honesty of someone who is finally ready to face the truth. This honesty is not comfortable. It hurts because it means acknowledging how many years have been wasted, how many opportunities have been allowed to pass, how often one has betrayed oneself to please others, how many masks have been worn until one's own face was forgotten. This realization brings pain. Pain for the versions of oneself that never became. Pain for the time that does not return. Pain for the decisions that cannot be undone. And this pain is necessary because only after grieving what has been lost can one begin to build what might still be. Many try to skip this step. They want to go straight to action, to visible changes, to measurable results. But building on an unknown foundation is a guarantee of future collapse. The house may look beautiful for a time, but cracks will form, because if the foundation remains broken, nothing built upon it will last. The chaos must be seen in its entirety, felt and acknowledged, before any genuine reorganization can begin. This acknowledgement also requires solitude, because no one can do it for you. No one can look into your own shadow and tell you exactly what needs to be integrated. Therapists, books, and content can guide, offer maps, share tools, but the real work is done in solitude. In the moments when all distractions are switched off, when one sits in silence with oneself and finally asks, "What is broken here?" And more importantly, why have I allowed it to remain broken? The answer is never simple. It is rarely traceable to a single cause. Most often, it is a complex web of family conditioning, unprocessed trauma, unexamined beliefs, and inherited patterns from previous generations. Unraveling this web takes time, requires patience, requires compassion, because for every layer removed, another is found beneath it. Every recognized wound reveals a deeper one. Every dissolved pattern reveals another that was hidden. It is an archaeological process of the soul with no expiration date. But there is liberation in this acknowledgement, because as long as the chaos is denied, it controls, acts behind the scenes, determines reactions, decisions, and relationships without one noticing. The moment it is acknowledged, power is taken from the unconscious and brought into consciousness. And everything that is conscious can be worked on, changed, and integrated. Jung said that enlightenment is not achieved by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And this making conscious begins with the simple but profound act of acknowledging, yes, there is chaos here. And yes, I am willing to look at it. This perspective must be compassionate. It does not judge, does not condemn, does not punish. It understands that every wrong decision was made with the tools available at the time. That every act of self-sabotage was an unconscious attempt at protection. That every destructive pattern once served a purpose in one's history. To acknowledge does not mean to agree, does not mean to justify. It simply means seeing things as they are, without beautification, without demonization. It means shining light on the dark, giving a name to the confused, clarifying the nebulous. And in this clarity, something changes, not externally, not yet, but internally. An acceptance arises, a relief at having finally stopped pretending that everything is fine, at having finally released the burden of perfection, at having finally allowed the truth to be what it is, ugly, painful, shameful, but true. And the truth, as hard as it is always the starting point of any genuine transformation, because only what is acknowledged can be worked on. Only what is named can transform. Only what is seen can be integrated again. The first step, therefore, is not to act, but to see. Not to do, but to acknowledge. Not to change, but to admit. And in this honest admission, without judgment, but with complete clarity, the true path to the reorganization of life begins. Not the life that others see, but the life one feels. The life lived behind the scenes, far from the stages, the performances, the masks. The true life, chaotic, imperfect, but fundamentally honest. Acknowledging the chaos without judgment is the first act of genuine self-love, because it is the capacity to look at oneself in one's worst moment and still not give up. It means remaining present even when everything inside wants to flee. It means holding one's own gaze even when what one sees causes too much pain. And in this steadfast presence, in this capacity to witness one's own chaos without falling apart, the strength is born that is necessary to truly begin the reorganization, not superficially, but deeply, structurally, definitively, because one now knows, truly knows, where to begin. And that changes everything. There is a modern addiction that goes unnoticed, the addiction to announcing, to sharing intentions before acting on them, to posting about changes before making them, to talking about goals before pursuing them. Every announcement, every declaration, every premature sharing robs something essential, the energy needed to turn words into actions. Because the brain does not distinguish well between talking about doing something and actually doing it. Both activate similar reward circuits. And when one receives validation, likes, and positive comments simply by announcing an intention, part of the urgency to realize that intention fades. Silence is protective. It preserves the seed while it germinates, because seeds are fragile. They need darkness, depth, time without external interference, so that the roots can anchor. When one announces too early, the seed is exposed before it has the necessary structure to withstand scrutiny. Jung developed much of his theory in silence. Years of inner work, confrontation with his own unconscious, exploration of unknown psychic territories, all away from the academic spotlight. He did not announce every discovery, did not share every idea in real time. He kept them to himself, processed them, integrated them. Only later, when the ideas had solidified, when the work had matured, did he make them known. And that allowed his contributions to be profound, structured, and transformative, not impulsive reactions or half-finished thoughts seeking validation. The world today is the opposite. It encourages instant sharing, total transparency, constant disclosure. This undoubtedly has its value, but it also brings a loss, the loss of the sacred space in which genuine transformations take place. Because real transformation is not a performance, not content, not something that can be divided into inspiring posts or motivating stories. It is dirty, disordered, contradictory work, full of advances and setbacks that do not fit into linear, uplifting narratives. When one remains silent about changes, two things happen. First, all energy is concentrated on acting, not on explaining. Second, one is protected from the projections of others, because the moment one announces, every person projects their own limitations, fears and beliefs onto the intention. Silence creates a protective bubble in which only oneself and one's own process exist, where there is no need to convince anyone, nothing to prove, nothing to perform. This does not mean total isolation, does not mean never sharing, but it means choosing the right moment. Sharing after the roots are firmly anchored, after one already has inner evidence that the change is real, after external validation is no longer needed to keep going. When one shares from a place of strength rather than vulnerability, the sharing becomes genuine inspiration, not a disguised request for approval. It becomes testimony to a path already walked, not a promise of a path that may never be taken. Jung warned of the danger of inflation. When one speaks too much about one's intentions, one's path, one's transformations, one risks drifting away from reality. One begins to believe the version of the story being told, even when it does not accurately reflect what one is actually experiencing. One begins to play the character of the transforming person, and this can become yet another mask. Silence keeps one honest, because without an audience, there is no incentive to embellish, exaggerate, or dramatize. There is also something deeply powerful in letting the results speak for themselves, simply being different, without having announced a change, without anyone having witnessed what unfolded behind the scenes of that metamorphosis. This silent evidence is more convincing than 1,000 posts about intentions. Many confuse documenting with living. They spend so much time documenting life that they forget to live it. They spend so much time explaining what they are going to do that they never get around to doing it. If one truly wants to reorganize life, one begins by keeping it to oneself, not as a shameful secret, but as a treasured possession. Let the changes happen behind the scenes. Let the transformation take place far from the spotlights. Work, act, build, dismantle, rebuild, all in silence. And when the moment comes, and one will know when it comes, when it still makes sense to share, then share. But share from a place of abundance, not need. Share because it can help others, not because their validation is needed. Share the result, not the promise, because promises are cheap. Genuine transformations are rare, precious, and deserve to be protected until they are solid enough to withstand the gaze of the world. You carry a weight that was never your own. Expectations planted before you could question them. Dreams sold as yours, but born in someone else's mind. Guilt on shoulders too small to bear it. Beliefs about who you should be, how you should live, what you should strive for. All instilled so early that you mistake them for innate truths, when in reality they are simply social and family programming you have never examined. And this weight, which is not your own, consumes energy, distorts decisions, and locks you into lives that seem right but feel empty. The family is the first programming field. There, one learns not only what is said, but above all what is felt, the unspoken fears, the hidden shame, the frustrated ambitions that are then projected onto the next generation. A father who could not become a doctor may unconsciously steer his son toward medicine. A mother who destroyed herself in a marriage may pass on to her daughter both the fear of relationships and the belief that relationships require self-destruction. These patterns are not transmitted through words, but through energy, through silent burdens. Jung explored in depth the collective unconscious and the archetypal patterns that span generations. But beyond this broader collective unconscious, there is a very specific family unconscious. Unprocessed trauma of grandparents can manifest in grandchildren. Limiting beliefs can be transmitted from parents to children without either realizing they are trapped in the same pattern. Identifying what is not your own requires brutal honesty. It requires examining every belief and asking, is this truly mine, or was it adopted? Scrutinizing every goal pursued and asking, does it nourish me, or am I seeking it to prove something to someone? Questioning every fear that paralyzes you and asking, did this fear arise from my own experience, or did I inherit it from someone carrying their own trauma? These questions have no simple answers. They require time, reflection, and often therapeutic support to untangle threads this old and intertwined. Many people spend their entire lives fulfilling expectations that were never explicitly verbalized, but were absorbed through approval or disapproval. They choose careers to make their parents proud. They build relationships to prove they are worthy of love. They accumulate achievements to compensate for a sense of inadequacy instilled in childhood. And all of this can look, externally, like a successful life. But internally, there is emptiness, because nothing one achieves to meet the expectations of others fills the soul. It nourishes the ego only temporarily, until the feeling of emptiness returns with even greater force. Letting go of what is not yours is one of the most liberating and also one of the most frightening acts. Liberating because one can finally begin to build an authentic life. Frightening because it often means disappointing people, saying no to predetermined paths, giving up the approval one has always sought. And the fear of disappointing others, especially parental figures, is one of the deepest and most primal fears. Because at an unconscious level, disappointing one's parents still feels like a threat to survival, even when one is long since an autonomous adult. Jung spoke of the necessity of psychological separation from one's parents as an essential part of individuation. This does not necessarily mean a break in the relationship. It means developing an inner center of authority that no longer depends on external approval, not even that of one's parents. It means being able to disagree, to choose differently, to live according to one's own values, even when these do not align with those handed down by the family. This separation is a process, not an event.
And it is a painful process because it involves grief. Grief over the fantasy that one could be who one truly is and still receive the unconditional approval of those who raised one according to their own expectations. Identifying what is not yours also extends to the dreams that society sells: owning a home, the latest car, a prestigious career, a traditional marriage, having children at the right time. None of this is wrong if one genuinely desires it. But how many pursue these goals simply because they are expected, because it is the standard script for a successful life? And when they have achieved all these milestones, they discover that nothing has changed inside, that the feeling of emptiness persists because they were pursuing the dreams of others, not their own. There are also guilt feelings that are not one's own. Guilt for things that happened in childhood, over which one had no control. Guilt for not having saved someone one could not save. Guilt for being happy when others are suffering. Guilt for taking up space, for having needs, for existing. These irrational guilt feelings often have deep roots. They were often planted by adults who, unable to process their own emotions, unloaded them onto a child. Returning what is not yours does not mean projecting onto others. It means acknowledging that certain responsibilities were never one's own, and that one can finally free oneself from them. The process of identifying what is not yours is essentially a psychic cleansing. It is like doing a deep clean of a house that has been accumulating things for decades. One picks up each object and asks, is this mine? Does it serve me? Does it nourish me, or does it only take up space? And everything that does not pass this test must be set aside, not in anger or resentment, but with gratitude for what it once fulfilled, and with the clarity that it is now time to let go. Because only by freeing space from what is foreign can one create space to discover, build, and live what is truly one's own. This cleansing does not happen all at once. It is an ongoing process because one is constantly bombarded with new expectations, new pressures, new should-be demands. Vigilance must be constant. The question, is this truly mine, must become a mental habit. And gradually, with practice, it becomes easier to distinguish, more natural to let go. Disappointing others becomes less frightening, because the freedom that comes from living an authentic, truly one's own life outweighs every approval lost along the way. That is the price, and it is worth every drop of courage needed to reach it. There is an important pause to make, because many people who follow this channel have already written deep, honest, and vulnerable messages. People saying that the content helps them, that they recognize themselves in it, that they find here an understanding they find nowhere else. That is beautiful, it matters, it has value. But in the subtext of those messages I recognize a pattern. Many are using the videos only as temporary comfort, as a therapeutic embrace that soothes them in the moment, but does not translate into genuine action. And I understand this completely, because action is frightening. Hearing about transformation is one thing. Actually transforming oneself is something else entirely. But I must be honest, no video, no reflection, no intellectual understanding will reorganize one's life. That only happens when one takes the first concrete step, when one stops being a spectator of one's own life and becomes the protagonist. And that step, no one can take for you. There is a fundamental practical tool that goes beyond reflection and enters the realm of action. An ebook entitled How to Transform Emotional Pain into Strength. It contains no empty theories, but concrete steps, practical exercises, and real tools to begin reorganizing oneself from the inside out. The link is in the first comment of this video.
If you genuinely want to move forward, if you want the next year to be different, not just in promises but in reality, this material could be the push you need to move from understanding to transformation.
Knowledge without application is merely entertainment. One can watch 1,000 videos, read 1,000 books, reflect endlessly, but until one acts, nothing changes. And you deserve change. You deserve a life that is truly your own. The human mind has a deep attachment to the familiar, even when the familiar is painful, toxic, or limiting, because the familiar is predictable, and there is a false sense of security in predictability, even when what is being predicted is suffering. At least one knows what to expect. The unknown, on the other hand, activates all the primitive alarm systems, and change, genuine transformation, is always a plunge into the unknown. That is why, the moment one decides to reorganize life, one encounters resistance, not primarily from outside, but from within, from one's own mind, which tries to pull one back to the familiar, to established patterns, to the comfort zone that is not comfortable, but is known. This resistance takes many forms. It can manifest as procrastination. One knows exactly what needs to be done, but always finds something more urgent, more important, more immediate. The day passes, the week, the month, and that essential change keeps being postponed. It can manifest as self-sabotage. One starts well, holds on for a few days, and then does something inexplicable that undoes all progress. But this self-sabotage is not weakness, it is disguised fear. It is the part of oneself that still believes change is dangerous, that being different means losing belonging, that reorganizing life might mean losing people, structures, and identities that, however problematic, are familiar. Jung warned that the process of individuation requires the death of the old self, and every death, even a symbolic one, triggers primitive resistance mechanisms because change, at a deep and unconscious level, appears to be a threat to survival, and the organism responds as it would to any threat: fight, flee, or freeze. Many give up at this point. They interpret the resistance as a sign that they are not yet ready, that it is not the right moment, that perhaps the change is not really necessary after all, and they return to the old pattern, momentarily relieved, but confirming to their subconscious that change is too dangerous. What is missing is the understanding that resistance is not a signal to stop. It is a signal that one is touching something real, something deep, something truly important. The right approach to resistance is not to fight it with willpower. It is not about overcoming it through brutal discipline or harsh self-criticism that usually amplifies it. The approach is dialogue. It is about acknowledging that the resistance comes from a part that is afraid, a part that once learned that change is dangerous. And that part needs to be heard, not silenced. It needs to be understood, not defeated. Jung recommended a process of active imagination, in which one literally enters into dialogue with different parts of the psyche. One can ask the resistance, "What are you afraid of? What are you trying to protect?" The answers may be surprising. Often the resistance arises not from fear of failure, but from fear of success. Because success brings responsibility, brings visibility, brings changes in relationship dynamics. There is also resistance that arises from invisible loyalty. One wants to change, wants to grow, wants a better life. But unconsciously, one feels that this would betray one's parents or the friends who stayed behind. There is guilt in moving forward when those one loves are stagnating. Working with these layers requires patience and compassion. There is no point in scolding oneself for having resistance. There is no point in brutally forcing oneself to overcome it. The way is that of integration. It is about acknowledging that the resistance has a positive intention, even if the result is negative. It is trying to protect. It is operating on old information, on outdated maps, but it sincerely believes it is protecting one from something dangerous. When one recognizes this, one can speak with this part, thank it for its intention, and gently explain that now, with more resources, more awareness, more support, it is safe to try something new. This conversation does not happen only once. It is a continuous dialogue. Every new level of change will generate new resistance,
because every level brings new fears. But the more one practices this dialogue, the more familiar one becomes with the process. One learns to recognize the signs of resistance before they become total sabotage. One learns to pause, listen, validate the fears, and then move gently forward, even with fear. Because courage is not the absence of fear, it is acting despite fear. It is acknowledging that something is frightening and choosing it anyway, because what lies beyond it is worth the discomfort of passing through. Jung experienced this process intensely.
He went through phases of deep psychic upheaval as he explored his own unconscious. He encountered immense resistance, the fear of going silent, of losing himself entirely. But he persisted. He dialogued with the figures that emerged from his unconscious, even when they were frightening. And from this confrontation emerged one of the most profound contributions to psychology. He showed through his own experience that it is possible to traverse the inner chaos and emerge more complete on the other side. Not unscathed, not unchanged, but integrated, conscious, transformed. One does not need to undertake as intense a journey as Jung did, but one must be willing to meet one's own resistance. One must acknowledge that it will arise, that it will try to convince one that change is dangerous, impossible, unnecessary. And one must move forward anyway, gently, but with resolve. Because on the other side of this resistance lies the life one truly wants, the person one truly is. And that person, that life, is worth every uncomfortable moment spent overcoming the fears that want to hold one back. The resistance is not the enemy, it is the keeper of the gate. One does not need to defeat it, only to acknowledge it, thank it, and keep going. When everything appears chaotic, when inner life is in crisis, rituals become anchors. Not necessarily religious rituals, though they can be, but intentional, repeated actions that create structure where there is disorder, that offer fixed points in a reality that seems fluid, unstable, and unpredictable. Rituals work because they create patterns, and patterns, when consciously chosen, are extraordinarily powerful for reorganizing not only daily life but also the psyche. Because the way one structures one's days gradually reorganizes the mind, the emotions, and the energy. A ritual need not be elaborate. A ritual can simply be waking up 15 minutes earlier to sit in silence before the noise of the day begins. It can be writing down 3 things to release before going to sleep. It can be walking aimlessly without headphones, simply observing. It can be preparing coffee mindfully, turning an automatic act into a moment of presence. What transforms an ordinary habit into a ritual is intention, the meaning one attaches to the act, the awareness with which one performs it. Jung valued symbols and rituals deeply. He understood that these elements speak directly to the unconscious, bypassing the rational mind, which tends to question, doubt, and resist. A well-structured ritual creates a bridge between the conscious and the unconscious. It communicates to the deepest part of oneself that one is committed, that this change matters, that one is willing to invest time, energy, and attention. And the unconscious responds to this, begins to align, begins to cooperate, because it perceives the seriousness of the intention. Repetition is essential. A ritual performed once is only an isolated action, but a ritual repeated daily or weekly creates a rhythm. And rhythm is what is missing in chaotic lives. People who feel lost often lack temporal structure. The days blur together. There are no milestones, no patterns, no reference points. Everything is too fluid, and this constant fluidity is exhausting. Rituals create this structure. Even when the rest of the day is unpredictable, one knows that these sacred moments will be there, these fixed points at which one reconnects with oneself and reaffirms one's commitment to transformation. Choosing the right ritual is personal. What works for one person may seem empty to another. The question is therefore not which ritual is most effective, but rather which ritual corresponds to my current need. If one needs more mental clarity, the ritual might be meditation. If one needs to process emotions, it might be writing. If one needs to restore contact with the body, it might be conscious movement. What matters is that the chosen ritual has personal meaning.
not because someone else recommended it, but because it genuinely helps. There are also closing rituals, not only for beginnings, but for ending cycles as well. When one decides to let something go, a farewell ritual can ease this process. It could be writing a letter to what one is releasing and then burning it, freeing it symbolically. It could be donating objects that represent this phase of life. It could simply be meditating and visualizing letting go, watching what no longer serves move away. These rituals are not magical, but they are psychologically powerful because they send the unconscious a clear signal. This is over. This belongs to the past. It is time to move on. Jung developed his own personal rituals. He built a tower at Bollingen, where he spent periods of retreat. In that space, he carried out intentional activities. He worked with stones, painted mandalas, and dialogued with figures from his unconscious. Each activity had symbolic meaning. They were not mere leisure pursuits, but ways of processing, integrating, and giving outer form to inner content. And this ritual work was essential to his discoveries and to his own psychological health. It demonstrated that rituals can be profound tools for self-knowledge and transformation. Resistance to rituals usually comes from two sources. First, the skepticism of the rational mind, which believes rituals are nonsense, superstition, a waste of time. Second, the fear of commitment, because a daily ritual requires discipline, requires presence, even on days when one does not feel like it. But when one genuinely embraces a ritual, one notices that it is no longer a task, but a refuge. It is the moment of the day when one does not need to perform, produce, or be present beyond the current moment. It is a sanctuary within the chaos. And strangely enough, the more chaotic life is, the more essential the ritual becomes, because it is what grounds one when everything around is turbulent. It reminds one of who one wants to be, even when the world is trying to pull one back into old patterns. Rituals also create a sense of sacredness. And sacred does not necessarily mean religious. It means what is reserved, protected, and treated with reverence. By creating a ritual, one declares, this moment is sacred. This space is sacred. This process is sacred. And in doing so, one adopts a different attitude toward